The flames danced in the backyard fire pit, casting orange shadows across Greg's face as he fed page after page into the hungry fire. I stood at the kitchen window, paralyzed, watching my husband systematically destroy our wedding album. Not just any album, the custom leather-bound masterpiece we'd displayed at our 25th anniversary party exactly 1 year ago. The album that had cost $3,000 to restore and preserve. The album every guest had admired, flipping through decades of our supposed love story. The evening had started innocuously enough. I'd been in the attic studio, finishing a logo design for a new client, when I heard his car pull into the driveway. Earlier than usual. The engine cut off with a decisive click, and through the window, I watched him stride toward the house with unusual purpose, carrying something rectangular wrapped in a beach towel. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. Just another of Greg's errands, another piece of the carefully constructed life he'd been dismantling without my knowledge. But now, watching those pages curl and blacken, I understood. He was erasing evidence, trying to rewrite history one burned photograph at a time. My hands trembled against the cold glass as I watched him stir the ashes with a poker, ensuring nothing remained. The fire reflected in his eyes, and even from this distance, I could see the grim determination on his face. This wasn't a moment of passion or rage. This was calculated. Methodical, just like everything else he'd done over the past 18 months. Each page he fed to the flames felt like another betrayal, another piece of our shared history reduced to ash and smoke. The November wind caught some of the embers, sending them spiraling into the darkening sky like dying fireflies. When he finally looked up and met my eyes through the window, there was no guilt, no explanation, just a cold, dead stare that froze my blood. We held that gaze for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. In that moment, I saw a stranger wearing my husband's face, someone capable of destroying 25 years of memories without a flicker of remorse. His jaw was set, his shoulders squared, his entire posture radiating defiance. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't sorry. He was simply eliminating inconvenient evidence, like a corporate executive shredding documents before an audit. That's when I knew. Whatever truth those ashes held, I was going to uncover it. But I also knew something else, something that made a cold smile curve my lips even as my heart hammered in my chest. He'd forgotten that I'm the graphic designer. Every single page of that album had been scanned and backed up to the cloud 3 years ago when I'd created a digital archive of all our family photos. His dramatic gesture was meaningless. I had the receipts, literally and figuratively. And as I stood there watching him try to erase our past, I realized this was the perfect metaphor for our entire marriage. Him destroying what was real while I held on to the evidence of what had been. 3 months earlier, life had seemed perfect. Almost annoyingly perfect. The kind of perfect that makes other couples roll their eyes. We lived in a charming brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. The kind with original crown molding and a view of the Manhattan skyline that made dinner guests gasp. Greg, 52, was a successful financial consultant with a corner office in Midtown. I was 48, working part-time as a graphic designer from our converted attic studio, spending the rest of my time volunteering at the community center and maintaining the life we'd built together. 25 years of marriage. 2 grown children living their own lives in Boston and San Francisco. A circle of friends we'd accumulated like precious stones over the decades. We'd just hosted that anniversary party at a rooftop venue in Chelsea, 300 guests celebrating a love story everyone envied. The evening had been magical. String lights draped across the terrace, a jazz trio playing our favorite songs, champagne flowing like water. I'd worn a silver dress that caught the light, and Greg had looked distinguished in his tailored navy suit. We'd danced to The Way You Look Tonight, our wedding song, while friends circled us with raised glasses and misty eyes. I remember standing in our bedroom the morning after that party, still riding the high of champagne toasts and heartfelt speeches, when I found the receipt. It had fallen out of Greg's suit pocket as I gathered clothes for the dry cleaner. Tiffany and Company. $8,400. Dated 2 weeks before our anniversary. My heart had jumped. Was this the surprise he'd hinted at? But I'd received no gift that night. No bracelet, no necklace, no earrings. Just the public declaration of love he'd made in his speech, the one that had brought tears to my eyes and applause from the crowd. I stood there in the morning sunlight, the receipt delicate as tissue paper between my fingers, and felt the first hairline crack appear in my perfect life. It was small, barely noticeable, the kind of crack you might dismiss as insignificant, but anyone who's ever watched a windshield slowly spiderweb after a chip knows that small cracks have a way of spreading. I smoothed the receipt against our dresser, staring at the transaction number, trying to construct innocent explanations. Maybe it was a surprise for our 30th anniversary, purchased early. Maybe he'd returned it. Maybe it was for a client. Though Greg had never bought gifts for clients from Tiffany before, I smoothed the receipt against our dresser, staring at the transaction number. Maybe he'd returned it, I told myself. Maybe he'd decided on something else. But a small voice whispered that I would have noticed a return of that size on our credit card statement. I managed our household finances, had for years. Greg was too busy with his clients to worry about mundane details like bills and budgets. That's what he always said anyway. With that responsibility, I'd become intimately familiar with every charge, every withdrawal, every transfer. An $8,000 purchase should have appeared on last month's statement. It hadn't. The morning sun streamed through our bedroom windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny witnesses to my growing unease. I could hear the distant sounds of Brooklyn Heights waking up, a car alarm, a dog barking, the garbage truck making its Monday rounds. Normal sounds of a normal morning in a normal life, except nothing felt normal anymore. I tucked the receipt into my jewelry box, telling myself I was being paranoid. 25 years of trust doesn't crumble over a misplaced receipt, but that tiny piece of paper had planted something in my mind, a seed of doubt that would grow into a forest of suspicion. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just ask him? But that's the thing about long marriages. You learn to read the weather, to sense when questions will be welcomed and when they'll cause storms. And something about the way Greg had been lately, distant but overly cheerful, made me hesitate. He'd developed this habit of overcompensating, being extra affectionate in public while barely touching me in private. He'd bring home flowers on random Tuesdays, but couldn't remember the last time we'd had a real conversation. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting, and some part of me already knew that asking would force me to confront answers I wasn't ready to hear. The crack widened 2 weeks later when I borrowed Greg's phone to look up a restaurant address. Mine was charging upstairs, and we were already running late for dinner with the Hendersons. His phone sat on the kitchen counter, unlocked, innocent. I opened his browser, and there, in his recent searches, was a list that made my stomach drop. Divorce lawyers in Manhattan, asset protection strategies, how to hide money from spouse. The words swam before my eyes, each one landing like a physical blow. I read them again, hoping I'd misunderstood, hoping my brain was scrambling the letters into something less devastating. But no, there they were, clear and damning. My legs felt weak, and I had to grip the counter to stay upright. The granite was cold beneath my palms, grounding me in this surreal moment. I stood there, frozen, the phone suddenly feeling like a live grenade in my hand. My first instinct was denial. Maybe he was helping a client, researching for someone else. Greg often advised people on financial matters. Surely this was work-related. I clung to that explanation like a life raft, building an entire scenario in my head. Yes, that made sense. Some client was going through a difficult divorce, needed advice on protecting their assets. Greg was just being thorough, doing research to better serve them. The alternative, that these searches were for him, for us, was too catastrophic to consider. But then a text notification popped up. Just a preview, but enough. Last night was incredible. When can I see you again? Followed by a heart emoji. The sender's name was simply Jay. Time seemed to stop. I stared at those words, my brain refusing to process their meaning even as my body responded with a flood of adrenaline. My heart rate spiked, my breathing became shallow, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. This was shock. I realized distantly the body's emergency response to psychological trauma. I carefully set the phone down exactly where I'd found it, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The kitchen, which moments ago had been our familiar, comfortable space, suddenly felt alien and hostile. The copper pots hanging above the island gleamed mockingly. The family photos on the refrigerator seemed to mock me with their frozen smiles. My hands shook as I set the phone down exactly where I'd found it, my mind racing. 25 years, a quarter century of my life, the foundation upon which I'd built my entire adult identity. And it was crumbling beneath me, revealed as nothing more than a beautiful facade with rot underneath. I made it to the powder room just in time before my legs gave out. I sank onto the closed toilet lid, head in my hands, trying to breathe through the panic. Questions cascaded through my mind in a relentless flood. How long had this been going on? Who was Jay? Did our friends know? Our children? Was I the last to know? The oblivious wife everyone pitied behind closed doors. The humiliation felt almost worse than the betrayal in that moment. That night at dinner, I watched Greg charm the Hendersons with his usual wit and warmth. We sat in their dining room with its vintage chandelier and original hardwood floors, drinking wine that tasted like ashes in my mouth. Martha Henderson, my friend of 15 years, had made her famous beef bourguignon, and everyone raved about it. Everyone except me. I pushed food around my plate, arranging and rearranging, hoping no one would notice I wasn't actually eating. Greg touched my hand across the table, laughed at my jokes, played the role of devoted husband with Academy Award precision. "This woman," he said at one point, squeezing my hand, "puts up with me traveling all the time, working late, missing dinners. I don't know what I did to deserve her." The Hendersons had smiled indulgently, and Martha had reached over to pat my other hand. "You two are relationship goals," she'd said, and I wanted to scream. I smiled and nodded and played my part too, but inside, I was screaming. Have you ever sat across from someone you thought you knew, watching them perform normalcy, while your entire world tilts sideways? It's like being trapped in a fun house mirror maze where nothing is quite right, but everyone else seems to see straight lines. Every laugh felt forced, every smile a lie. Every touch from Greg's hand on mine sent revulsion crawling up my arm. But I couldn't break character, not yet. I needed time to think, to plan, to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. The drive home was excruciating. Greg chattered about the Hendersons' upcoming cruise to Greece, about some deal he was closing at work, about whether we should get the gutters cleaned before winter. Mundane domestic topics that felt surreal given what I'd discovered. I gave non-committal responses, staring out the window at the Brooklyn streets sliding past. The neighborhoods looked different somehow, like I was seeing them through new eyes. Everything familiar had become strange, everything solid had become uncertain. When I finally confronted him 3 days later, I'd rehearsed my approach 100 times. Calm, rational, giving him the benefit of doubt. We were in the kitchen. Saturday morning, the coffee maker gurgling its familiar song. Weak November sunlight filtered through the windows, doing little to warm the chill I felt in my bones. I'd barely slept in 72 hours, spending nights staring at the ceiling while Greg snored peacefully beside me. How could he sleep so soundly with such massive lies between us? Did he have no conscience at all? I slid the Tiffany receipt across the granite counter, my movements deliberate and controlled. "I found this. I never received anything from Tiffany." "Can you explain?" My voice was steadier than I felt. but my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. I watched his face carefully, looking for tells, for any flicker of guilt or recognition. Greg barely glanced at it. He laughed, actually laughed, as he poured his coffee into his favorite mug, the one Melissa had given him for Father's Day years ago. The sound of that laugh, casual, dismissive, completely unconcerned, did something to me. It transformed the hurt into something harder, colder. Oh, that. It's complicated, Maggie. That was for a client appreciation gift. I must have forgotten to file it with my business expenses. He kissed my forehead, his lips feeling like ice against my skin, and I had to force myself not to flinch away. You're so cute when you worry about nothing. Cute. He'd called me cute, like I was a child concerned about monsters under the bed, not a wife who'd discovered her husband searching for divorce lawyers. The dismissiveness in his tone made something inside me shrivel. This was gaslighting, I realized. Not the dramatic kind from movies, but the subtle, erosive kind that makes you question your own sanity bit by bit. I'd read about this, had seen it depicted in articles and books, but experiencing it firsthand was different. It was insidious, making you doubt the evidence of your own eyes and ears. And the search history on your phone? I pressed, my voice cracking now despite my best efforts. The divorce lawyers? His face transformed then, from casual to cold in an instant. The shift was so complete, so sudden, that I actually took a step back. This was a Greg I'd never seen before. Hard, angry, defensive. His blue eyes, which had always reminded me of summer skies, now looked like chips of ice. You went through my phone? His voice rose, filling the kitchen with accusation. Jesus, Maggie, that's a massive invasion of privacy. I can't believe you'd do something so sneaky, so underhanded. What happened to trust in this marriage? He set his coffee down with enough force that it sloshed over the rim, staining the counter. I watched the brown liquid spread across the granite, a physical manifestation of the mess seeping into our life. I was researching for a client, obviously. This is what I do for a living, remember? I help people with their finances, including divorce situations. Just last week, Tom Reynolds came to me in crisis mode about his wife leaving. I was gathering information to help him. The explanation was smooth, practiced, and might have convinced me if I hadn't also seen the text. But I was already doubting myself, the way he'd flipped the script so expertly. Is this what you're going to be like now? He continued, his tone shifting from anger to weary disappointment. Paranoid and accusatory? Going through my private things, making wild assumptions. Maybe the stress of the party took more out of you than I thought. You've been working so hard, and I know you've been worried about your mother's health. Maybe you should see someone, talk to a therapist about these trust issues. And there it was, the pivot, the redirect. Suddenly, I was the problem. My concerns became evidence of my instability, my questions proof of my paranoia. He suggested I was overworked, overstressed, possibly even menopausal. That last one delivered with such casual cruelty that it took my breath away. Each word landed like a carefully placed stone on my chest, making it harder to breathe, harder to trust my own perceptions. By the time he left for his Saturday golf game, pausing to squeeze my shoulder and tell me gently that he loved me despite my episode, I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at that receipt, genuinely wondering if I was losing my mind. That's the insidious nature of manipulation. It doesn't announce itself with a villain's mustache twirl. It seeps in slowly, making you complicit in your own doubt. Had I overreacted? Was there an innocent explanation? Was my mind, stressed and tired, constructing elaborate betrayals out of mundane circumstances? But then I found the second text. This time I was looking, scrolling through his phone while he showered after his golf game. I'd never been the snooping type. Had prided myself on respecting privacy in our marriage. But desperate times, right? The message from Jay was more explicit this time, sent just an hour ago while he was supposedly on the back nine. Can't wait for our weekend in the Hamptons. The place you booked looks amazing. Finally, a whole weekend just us, without you having to rush back to her. Her. The pronoun hit me like a slap. I was her now. The obstacle, the inconvenience. Weekend in the Hamptons? Greg had told me he had a financial conference in Chicago next weekend, had even shown me the confirmation email, though now I realized he could have easily fabricated that. The metallic taste of shock flooded my mouth as I screenshot the message and texted it to myself, then deleted the evidence of my snooping. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone, had to grip it with both hands to steady it. I forwarded the screenshot to a new email address I'd created just for this purpose, then cleared it from my recently deleted texts. I was learning to cover my tracks, to think like someone with something to hide. It was a strange, uncomfortable transformation, but necessary. If Greg could compartmentalize and deceive, then so could I. That's when the sadness began to calcinate into something else, something harder, sharper. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was being lied to, systematically and deliberately. And instead of crumbling, instead of dissolving into the weeping, betrayed wife I probably should have been, I felt something cold and clear settle in my chest. If Greg wanted to play games, I'd learn the rules. If he wanted to hide things, I'd become an expert at finding them. That night, while he snored beside me, how dare he sleep so peacefully, I lay awake in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of our bedroom. The vintage radiator clanking to life, the tree branches scraping against the window, Greg's deep, even breathing. Sounds I'd heard thousands of times, sounds that had always been comforting. Now they felt like the soundtrack to a horror movie, ominous and threatening. I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him again until I had irrefutable proof. No more giving him chances to spin narratives, to make me doubt my own reality. This time, I'd be the one controlling the story. I'd gather evidence, build a case, and when the time was right, I'd present him with a truth so comprehensive he couldn't talk his way out of it. The next morning, I called Lisa. We'd been friends since our freshman year at NYU, had been each other's bridesmaids, had raised our kids in parallel. If anyone would understand, would help without judgment, it was Lisa. We met at a coffee shop in Park Slope, far enough from our usual haunts that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. I'd chosen the location carefully, a small place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, the kind of spot where everyone minded their own business. Lisa was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cappuccinos waiting. She'd cut her dark hair short since I'd last seen her, and it made her look both younger and more serious. When I slid into the booth across from her, she took one look at my face and immediately reached for my hand. "What happened?" she asked, her voice gentle but alert. Lisa had been through her own divorce 10 years ago, had survived her ex-husband's affair with his secretary. Such a cliché it would have been funny if it hadn't been so devastating. She knew this territory, had walked this path before me. When I told her everything, the receipt, the texts, the searches, the gaslighting, she didn't look surprised. She looked sad, the kind of deep sadness that comes from recognition. She squeezed my hand tighter, her brown eyes filled with understanding and anger on my behalf. "Maggie," she said, her voice low and intense, "I've been worried about Greg for months. The way he talks about you when you're not around, like you're this burden he's carrying, like being married to you is some noble sacrifice he's making. I heard him at David's birthday party last summer, talking to some of the guys about how you've let yourself go, how you're not the woman he married. I almost said something then, but I didn't want to cause trouble if I was misreading the situation." Her words cut deep, each one a fresh wound. Greg had been undermining me to our friends, laying groundwork for his departure by painting me as the problem. How long had this been going on? How many people in our social circle had heard him trash me while I remained oblivious? The humiliation burned through my chest like acid. I should have said something sooner, Lisa continued, guilt written across her face. I just kept hoping I was wrong, that I was projecting my own experience onto your marriage. But Maggie, the signs are all there. Whatever he's doing, it's calculated. Men don't search for divorce lawyers and asset protection on a whim. He's planning something, and you need to protect yourself. Lisa pulled out her laptop right there in the coffee shop and showed me how to install a tracking app on Greg's phone, how to set up alerts for credit card charges, how to access cell phone records online. She had a whole toolkit of resources, remnants from when she'd suspected her own ex-husband of cheating 10 years ago. This feels wrong, I said, watching her navigate through various websites and apps. Spying on my own husband. It's not spying, Lisa corrected firmly. It's protecting yourself. He's already violated the trust of your marriage. You're just making sure you understand the full scope of what you're dealing with. Information is power. And honey, you need to arm yourself. We spent 2 hours in that coffee shop, Lisa teaching me the tools of modern surveillance, how to check cloud storage for shared location data, how to recover deleted texts, how to track spending patterns. She even gave me the number of a private investigator she'd used, though she hoped I wouldn't need to go that far. By the time we left, I had an entire arsenal of investigative tools at my disposal, and Lisa had made me promise to call her any time, day or night. You don't have to go through this alone, she said, hugging me tight on the sidewalk outside. I'm here. Whatever you need, a place to stay, someone to vent to, help hiding bodies, I'm here. That last part made me laugh, the first genuine laugh I'd had in days. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. With what he's putting you through, Lisa said darkly, I'd help you dispose of the body and never lose a night's sleep over it. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a different person. By day, I was still Maggie Collins, devoted wife and community volunteer. I showed up at the community center, led my graphic design workshop for teenagers, attended book club, smiled at neighbors. But by night, I was a detective, piecing together the puzzle of my husband's secret life. The tracking app on his phone revealed patterns I'd never noticed. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he went to the same location in Soho, staying for hours. The credit card alerts showed charges at restaurants and shops I'd never heard of, purchases that never came home to our brownstone. I discovered that Jay was Jessica Hartley, a 34-year-old associate at Greg's firm. Finding her identity had been almost too easy. Greg had mentioned a new bright young associate named Jessica months ago at a dinner party, praising her financial acumen and work ethic. I'd even smiled and said something encouraging about mentoring the next generation. The irony was bitter as vinegar. I found her Instagram public because she was proud of her life and had no reason to hide. There were no photos of Greg, but there were plenty of artfully shot images from restaurants I recognized from our credit card statements, wine bars Greg had supposedly visited with clients, weekend trips to places he'd claimed were business conferences. I found hotel receipts for weekends when he claimed to be at conferences, tucked into his gym bag like they didn't matter. I uncovered a pattern of expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together, places with romantic lighting and prix-fixe menus, the kind of spots you take someone you're trying to impress. And most damning of all, I discovered the apartment. A luxury one-bedroom in Soho, leased under an LLC that Greg had created 6 months ago. I found the documents in his briefcase late one night when he was in the shower, paper-clipped together with the casual confidence of someone who never expected to be discovered. The LLC was called Collins Consulting Properties. Creative naming there, Greg. The rent was $4,500 a month, paid from an account I'd never known existed. My hands had trembled as I photographed each page with my phone, making sure to capture every detail. The lease was signed by both Greg Collins and Jessica Hartley. This wasn't just a love nest he visited. This was their shared space, their practice run at Playing House. I felt the last remnants of denial crumble away. This was real. This was happening. My husband had been building an entire separate life, right under my nose, for at least 6 months. The tracking app showed he went there every Tuesday and Thursday evening, his supposed late nights at the office. I cross-referenced the dates with his calendar and saw the lies stacked like building blocks, working dinners that never involved work, client meetings that were really trysts, business trips that were romantic getaways. My biggest obstacle was Greg's meticulous nature. He cleared his browser history religiously, paid cash when he could, was careful about his paper trail. But people can't maintain perfect operational security forever. There are always cracks, always mistakes. And I found them, one by one, like breadcrumbs leading me to the gingerbread house of lies he'd constructed. The discovery process was exhausting, each new piece of evidence feeling like another betrayal. I developed insomnia, surviving on maybe 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. I lost weight, unable to eat while sitting across from Greg at dinner, watching him perform the role of loving husband. Dark circles appeared under my eyes, and when people asked if I was okay, I blamed it on a demanding client project. But I didn't cry. I cataloged, documented, screenshot, and filed. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford yet. The day I visited the Soho apartment was gray and drizzling, the kind of October morning that makes New York look like a noir film. Perfect weather for unveiling betrayal, I thought grimly. I'd followed Greg there on a Tuesday evening, watched from across the street as he entered the building with a bouquet of flowers. Roses, I noted. The expensive kind from the fancy florist on Fifth Avenue. He'd never brought me flowers anymore, claiming I was allergic, which I'd never actually said. Just another small lie in the tapestry of deception. I'd watched the lights come on in an 8th-floor window, waited hours in my car, watching shadows move behind the curtains. 2 silhouettes merging into one. I'd gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached, forcing myself to watch, to bear witness to this reality. When Greg finally emerged the next morning, early enough to make it to his actual office by 9, I waited another hour before approaching the building. The doorman was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a thick accent I couldn't quite place. I approached with a story about being Greg's sister, needing to drop off some documents, a file folder I'd brought as a prop. He looked skeptical until I produced a $50 bill, which I slid across the desk with what I hoped was a conspiratorial smile. "Family emergency," I said. "He's not answering his phone, and these papers are really important. I just need to slip them under his door. 5 minutes, I promise." The money disappeared into his pocket with practiced ease. "8th floor, 8C. But I didn't see you, understand?" The elevator ride up felt endless, my reflection staring back at me from the polished metal doors. I looked haunted, I realized. Pale and thin, dark circles prominent despite the concealer I'd carefully applied. This is what betrayal looks like, I thought. This is what it does to you. The apartment door was locked, of course, but I had another 50 ready for the possibility of a master key. Unnecessary, as it turned out. The door to 8B opened and an elderly woman peeked out. "Are you the new tenant?" she asked hopefully. I haven't had a chance to introduce myself yet. "Oh, no," I said, thinking quickly. "I'm Greg's sister. Just checking on the place while he's out of town." She tisked sympathetically. "Poor dear, works so hard. Though I must say his girlfriend is lovely. Such a sweet young thing, always very polite. They make a lovely couple." The words landed like physical blows, but I managed to keep smiling. "They do, don't they? Actually, I seem to have misplaced my key. You wouldn't happen to know if the superintendent is around?" 5 minutes and another $20 later, I was inside the apartment. The apartment was tastefully decorated in a modern style that was nothing like our brownstone. Everything was sleek and minimal. White walls, contemporary furniture, abstract art that probably cost thousands. The kind of space featured in design magazines. Cold and perfect and utterly impersonal. Or maybe it just felt impersonal to me because I didn't belong here, was an intruder in my husband's secret life. The kitchen had state-of-the-art appliances that gleamed unused, the bathroom featured a rainfall shower and heated floors. And the bedroom. God, the bedroom. A king-size bed with expensive linens, a view of the Soho streets below, and photographs on both nightstands. Not framed photos of family or friends, but candid shots clearly taken by the people who lived here. I found photos on the bookshelf. Greg and Jessica at a beach, at a wine tasting, at a Broadway show. In every image, they looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way that made my chest constrict. Greg was smiling the way he used to smile at me, back in the early days, before life and responsibilities and time wore down the shine. In one photo, they were caught mid-laugh, his arm around her waist, her head thrown back in unguarded joy. They looked like a real couple, like people building a life together. Because that's exactly what they were doing, I realized with a sick feeling. This wasn't just an affair. This was a whole separate life. A test run for a future that apparently didn't include me. But it was the lease documents I found in the desk drawer that turned my sadness to ice-cold rage. The apartment was in both their names, with Greg listed as the primary leaseholder. The lease had started 6 months ago, right around the time he'd started complaining about wanting to spend more time in the city for work, about how the commute from Brooklyn Heights was killing him. There were other documents, too. Bank statements showing Greg had been siphoning money from our joint accounts into this secret account for over a year. I sat at the desk, hands shaking as I flipped through page after page. Approximately $15,000 a month, transferred in amounts just small enough not to trigger immediate attention. $5,000 here, $3,000 there, $2,000 somewhere else. Death by 1,000 cuts to our retirement fund, our emergency savings, our children's inheritance. The transfers accumulated to a substantial nest egg, by my rough calculation, over $250,000. My nest egg, our retirement money, funding his fantasy life with a woman young enough to be our daughter. I photographed everything with shaking hands, my breath coming in short gasps. The magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a stupid mistake. This was calculated, premeditated, a systematic dismantling of our life together while maintaining the facade of normalcy. I thought about all the times he'd criticized my spending, questioned whether we really needed to repair the roof or update the kitchen. "Money doesn't grow on trees, Maggie," he'd said when I wanted to replace our 15-year-old refrigerator. "We need to be smart about our retirement." All while secretly spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on his mistress and their love nest. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. In the closet, I found more evidence of their shared life. His clothes hanging next to hers, his cologne on the dresser, his favorite brand of coffee in the kitchen. This wasn't a place he visited. This was a home, carefully constructed and meticulously maintained. A home that had been built with my money, on the foundation of my trust. While I played house in Brooklyn Heights with a man who was only physically present a fraction of the time. As I left that apartment, carefully locking the door behind me and nodding to the doorman on my way out, I was no longer a victim. I was a woman with a mission. The sadness and shock had crystallized into something hard and purposeful. Greg wanted to erase me from his life? Fine. But I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth first. But here's what no one tells you about discovering betrayal on this scale. You have to keep living in it. I went home to that brownstone we'd shared for 15 years and pretended everything was fine. Greg came home that evening, kissed my cheek, and asked what was for dinner like he hadn't just spent the previous night in another woman's bed. I cooked dinner, chicken piccata, one of his favorites. I asked about his day. I laughed at appropriate moments during the evening news. And all the while I was planning. Every casual conversation was a performance. Every smile a calculated mask. I was living in a constant state of cognitive dissonance, playing the role of devoted wife while preparing for war. I consulted with Linda Morrison, the toughest divorce attorney in Manhattan. came recommended by Lisa. Linda's office overlooked Central Park, and she had the kind of sharp, no-nonsense demeanor that made me feel instantly safer. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct, and within 5 minutes of meeting her, I understood why she had a reputation for destroying unfaithful spouses in court. She took detailed notes as I laid out everything I'd discovered, occasionally asking pointed questions about dates, amounts, and documentation. When I showed her the bank statements, she whistled low, a sound of professional admiration. "This is good," Linda said, and I almost laughed at the absurdity. Good? My marriage was a sham, but at least I had good evidence. New York is an equitable distribution state, but we can argue for a larger share given the financial deception and dissipation of marital assets. Plus, if he was using joint funds to support the affair, that plays very well for us. Judges don't like spouses who steal from the marriage to fund infidelity. We spent 2 hours strategizing, Linda's mind working like a chess master planning moves several steps ahead. She advised me to secure my personal assets immediately, open a new bank account, redirect my freelance income, protect anything that was solely mine. She also suggested I continue gathering evidence for as long as I could stand it. "The more ammunition we have, the better your settlement will be," she said, her pen tapping against her legal pad with crisp efficiency. "But only do what you can handle psychologically. This isn't worth your mental health. If you need to pull the trigger tomorrow, we have enough. But if you can hold out another few weeks or months, we'll have an airtight case." "How long do these things usually take?" I asked, dreading the answer. "With cooperation and clear evidence? 3 to 6 months from filing. With someone like your husband, who'll likely fight every point. Could be a year or more. But Maggie?" She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Don't let fear of the process keep you in a marriage that's already over. Sometimes the long road is worth it to reach the right destination." I left her office feeling both empowered and nauseated. The reality was setting in. My marriage was ending, had probably been over for years without me realizing it. That night, I moved my personal savings to a new account at a different bank. Roughly $40,000 I'd accumulated from my design work over the years. Money I'd earned separately from Greg, money that was unquestionably mine. It felt like putting on armor, this act of financial independence. I also quietly made copies of all our important documents: tax returns, property deeds, investment statements, insurance policies. I worked late into the night while Greg was at one of his client dinners, the copier in my attic studio whirring steadily as I duplicated our entire financial life. I stored everything in a safe deposit box at my new bank, building my fortress of evidence one document at a time. Greg noticed nothing. He was too busy living his double life to pay attention to the wife he was discarding. The psychological toll was immense. Every morning I woke up next to him. I felt like I was lying next to a stranger wearing my husband's face. His breathing, once comforting, now made my skin crawl. Every time he kissed me goodbye, I tasted the lie, bitter and metallic. Every time he said, "I love you," I heard what he wasn't saying. "I'm counting down the days until I can leave." But I held it together because I had to. I needed time to prepare, to position myself for the best possible outcome. I also needed the perfect moment for the confrontation. It couldn't be private, not after he'd gaslit me so effectively last time. It needed to be public, undeniable, a revelation that would strip away his ability to spin and manipulate. I needed witnesses who would force him to face consequences. The close call came on a Thursday evening in late November. I'd been organizing my copied documents in the attic studio when I heard Greg come home earlier than expected, a full hour before his usual time. Panic flooded through me as I heard his footsteps on the stairs coming up to the attic. I barely had time to shove everything into a portfolio and cover it with fabric samples before he appeared in the doorway, his expression suspicious and alert. "What are you working on?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room like he could detect lies in the air molecules. There was something different in his voice, a sharpness I hadn't heard before. My heart hammered so hard I was sure he could hear it, but I kept my expression neutral, mildly curious. "Just organizing old client files," I said, keeping my voice steady and casual. "Spring cleaning in autumn. You know how I like to tidy up before the holidays." He lingered in the doorway for a long moment, his eyes moving from me to the portfolio, to the folders spread across my desk, back to my face. I could see him calculating, trying to determine if something was off. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Jessica wondering where he was, why he wasn't at the apartment as scheduled, and his attention shifted. He pulled out his phone, glanced at the screen, and his expression softened slightly. "Client emergency," he said, already backing toward the stairs. "I need to take this. Don't wait up." The moment I heard the front door close and his car pull out of the driveway, I exhaled shakily and slumped in my chair. That had been too close, dangerously close. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway before I exhaled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The near discovery had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, thinking about the last 25 years. Had any of it been real? Or had I been living in a carefully constructed illusion? A Truman Show marriage where I was the only one who didn't know the cameras were rolling? The questions spiraled, threatening to pull me under. When had he stopped loving me? Had he ever really loved me? Or had I just been convenient, suitable, good enough until something better came along? I thought about our early years, struggling newlyweds in a cramped apartment, eating ramen and dreaming of the future. I thought about the births of our children, how Greg had cried holding Melissa for the first time, how he'd been there for every midnight feeding and diaper change. I thought about vacations and holidays and ordinary Tuesday nights on the couch. Had all of it been a lie? Or had it been real once, before it curdled into this grotesque performance? But then I remembered something my mother used to say. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Greg had shown me. The lies, the gaslighting, the secret apartment, the siphoned money. These were his truths. This was who he really was beneath the charming exterior and practiced affection. And my truth was that I deserved better, deserved real, deserved someone who didn't treat our marriage like a part-time job he could clock out of whenever convenient. The idea for the public confrontation came to me during my morning run through Prospect Park. It was a crisp December morning, my breath clouding in front of me as I jogged past the bare trees and frozen lake. My mind was clearer during these runs, the physical exertion burning away some of the constant anxiety. And that's when it hit me. The perfect venue, the perfect timing, the perfect audience. The Giving Heart Gala, an annual charity event benefiting children's hospitals, was scheduled for mid-December. Greg was receiving the Philanthropist of the Year award for his firm's donations and volunteer work. It was a huge deal in our social circle, black tie event at the Plaza Hotel, with 500 guests including business associates, friends, and family. The invitation sat on our refrigerator, held by a magnet, mocking me every time I looked at it. We'd already RSVP'd yes, had matching outfits planned, were expected to give one of those nauseating couple speeches about shared values and giving back. It was perfect. He'd be on stage, literally in the spotlight, surrounded by everyone whose opinion he valued. There would be no room for deflection, no private space for him to rewrite the narrative. The irony of destroying him at an event honoring his charitable giving wasn't lost on me. The man who'd stolen from his own marriage getting exposed while accepting an award for generosity. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing with the focus of a military campaign. I compiled a presentation. Nothing too dramatic, just a simple slideshow. Photos of Greg and Jessica from the Soho apartment. Screenshots of the lease agreement. Bank statements showing the siphoned funds. Text messages between them discussing their future together. their plans for after the divorce, their mutual disdain for Maggie the Martyr. Apparently that's what Jessica called me. I worked on it in my studio. Door locked, headphones on, heart racing every time I heard a noise. The presentation was crafted with a designer's eye for impact. Clean layouts, undeniable evidence, a narrative that built from suspicious to damning to devastating. I rehearsed the order, the timing, the words I would say. I wanted calm and controlled, not hysterical or vindictive. I wanted the evidence to speak for itself, to be so overwhelming that no amount of spin could counter it. I also made sure key people would be there. Our adult children were flying in for the event, as were several of Greg's business partners and our closest friends. Melissa had called excitedly about her flight arrangements, about the dress she'd bought for the occasion, about how proud she was of Dad. Each word had been a knife to my heart, knowing what I was about to reveal. David had been more subdued but equally proud, planning to bring his girlfriend to meet more of our social circle. I wanted maximum impact, wanted to ensure that everyone who'd heard Greg's beautiful anniversary speech last year would witness this reckoning. The night before the gala, I barely slept. Tomorrow, I would blow up my life, but at least I'd be doing it on my own terms. Greg was chipper at breakfast, excited about his award, completely oblivious to the impending detonation. He scrolled through his phone between bites of toast, probably texting Jessica about their plans for after the event. Did they plan to sneak away together? To celebrate his award in their secret apartment while I went home alone to Brooklyn Heights? I watched him across the table, this man I'd built a life with, and felt nothing but a cold, clear resolve. He'd made his choices. Now he'd face the consequences. "You seem quiet," he observed, finally looking up from his phone. "Everything okay?" I smiled, the expression feeling both foreign and genuine on my face. "Just thinking about how proud I am of you," I said, and technically it wasn't even a lie. I was proud of myself for having the strength to do what needed to be done. The plaza glittered like a jewel box that evening, its famous golden crystal ballroom filled with Manhattan's charitable elite. I wore a red dress, scarlet as revenge, that I'd bought specifically for this occasion. It was bold and beautiful, and made me feel powerful. Greg's eyes had widened appreciatively when he saw me. "You look stunning," he'd said, reaching out to adjust my necklace in a gesture that might have seemed tender if I didn't know better. "That dress is incredible. Is it new?" "Brand new," I confirmed, thinking. "I want you to remember how I looked when I destroyed you. I want this image burned into your memory forever." We worked the room together, the perfect couple, his hand possessive on my lower back. I smiled and chatted and accepted congratulations on his award, all while my presentation sat loaded and ready on a USB drive in my clutch. The technical crew thought I was presenting a tribute video to my husband. I'd called ahead, explained I wanted to surprise him with a montage of our years together. They had been enthusiastic and helpful, even showing me how to cue the video myself from the podium. They had no idea they were about to become accomplices in the greatest public humiliation of Greg Collins's life. Dinner was a multi-course affair: butternut squash soup, filet mignon, some kind of chocolate torte. I pushed food around my plate, too nervous to eat, while Greg ate heartily and held court at our table. He told charming stories about his philanthropic work, about the children his firm's donations had helped, about the importance of giving back to the community. Everyone listened raptly, completely taken in by his performance. When the moment came, when Greg stood at the podium accepting his Crystal Award and delivering a humble speech about the importance of giving back, I waited. My hands were steady as I sipped my water, my heart rate calm despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. I let him talk about family values and integrity, and the privilege of helping others. I let him thank me, his devoted wife of 25 years, for being his rock and his inspiration. "None of this would be possible without Maggie," he said, his voice warm and sincere, gesturing toward me. She's been my partner in everything, my moral compass, my best friend. The real philanthropist in our family is her. She gives of herself every single day, expecting nothing in return. The audience applauded, and I stood, smiling, as he gestured for me to join him on stage. This wasn't part of the program, but no one questioned it. Why would they? We were the golden couple, the ones who threw that amazing anniversary party last year, the ones everyone wanted to emulate. I made my way to the stage, heels clicking on the polished floor, aware of hundreds of eyes following my progress. The spotlight was warm on my skin as I climbed the stairs, Greg's hand reaching out to help me up. I took it, felt his familiar grip, and stepped into position beside him. I took the microphone from Greg's hand, feeling its weight, its power. For a second, I caught a glimpse of Melissa and David in the front row, beaming with pride at their parents. My heart clenched, but I pushed through. They needed to know the truth, too. "Thank you all so much," I began, my voice steady and clear through the sound system. "It means the world to be here celebrating Greg's generosity tonight. As his wife, I've had a front row seat to his charitable nature, his willingness to give freely to those in need." Greg smiled beside me, oblivious, basking in the praise. The audience settled in for what they expected, a sweet spousal tribute, perhaps some embarrassing anecdotes and heartfelt declarations of love. "I've prepared a little presentation," I continued, my voice taking on a sharper edge, "about the Greg Collins I know, the real Greg. I think it's important that everyone here understands exactly who they're honoring tonight." I saw confusion flicker across Greg's face, saw him start to reach for the microphone, but I was already moving to the laptop, already clicking the first slide. The lights dimmed. The screen behind us flickered to life. And there they were, Greg and Jessica, frozen in digital amber. Beach photos. Restaurant photos. Photos from the Soho apartment that I'd taken weeks ago. The gasps started immediately, rippling through the ballroom like a wave crashing across sand. Shock spread from table to table, faces turning from the screen to Greg to me and back again. I didn't look at Greg. Not yet. I kept my eyes on the audience, watching recognition and shock bloom on hundreds of faces simultaneously. "Meet Jessica Hartley," I said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Greg's girlfriend of approximately 18 months. She lives with him in this lovely one-bedroom apartment in Soho." Click. The lease agreement appeared on screen, the signatures clear and undeniable. As you can see, he's been very generous with her, spending roughly $15,000 a month of our marital assets on their relationship. The murmur grew louder, voices rising in confusion and outrage. I could see our children in the front row, Melissa's hand over her mouth, her face draining of color. David half rising from his seat, his expression murderous. But I wasn't done. This needed to be comprehensive, irrefutable. Click. Bank statements appeared, highlighting the transferred funds in fluorescent yellow. Every transaction illuminated, every theft documented. Over the course of their affair, Greg has siphoned approximately $270,000 from our joint accounts. Money we'd saved for retirement, for emergencies, for the future we were supposedly building together. My voice remained calm, almost clinical, but inside I was burning with righteous fury. This was it. The moment everything changed. The moment the truth detonated in the middle of Greg's carefully constructed facade. But the real generosity, the real charity here, is how Greg gave me 25 years of lies while planning his exit strategy. How he gaslit me when I questioned suspicious receipts. How he made me feel crazy for trusting my own instincts. How he stole from our marriage to fund his fantasy life while criticizing my spending on household repairs. The ballroom had erupted in chaos now, people standing, shouting, phones out and recording. Greg's business partners looked sick, probably calculating their own liability. Our friends looked devastated, betrayed on my behalf. And Jessica, I spotted her now, at a table near the back, her face white as she realized her secret life was no longer secret. Finally, I turned to look at him. Greg's face had gone from tanned confidence to ashen shock. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air, no words emerging. The Crystal Award hung forgotten in his hand. "Maggie," he finally croaked, reaching for the microphone. I stepped back, holding it out of his reach. "Here's to the man who truly knows how to live two lives," I said, my voice ringing through the now silent ballroom. "Only now. Both are over. Congratulations on your award, Greg. You've earned it." I set the microphone carefully on the podium, the thunk of it hitting wood echoing through the sound system. Then I turned and walked off that stage with my head high, my back straight, my red dress blazing like a flag of war. Behind me, chaos erupted. Voices shouting, chairs scraping, Greg's desperate attempts at explanation drowning in the tide of public disgrace. The immediate fallout was spectacular. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone was exploding with texts and calls. I could hear the commotion continuing in the ballroom, could hear Greg's voice rising above the din, trying to explain, to justify, to spin. But there was no spinning out of this. The evidence was too comprehensive, too public, too damning. Melissa and David caught up with me in the lobby, both in tears. Melissa hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, her body shaking with sobs. "Mom, we had no idea," she kept saying, her voice breaking. "We had no idea. I'm so sorry. God, I'm so sorry." David looked murderous, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. "I'm going to kill him," he said, his voice deadly calm. "I'm actually going to kill him." "No, you're not," I said, cupping his face with both hands. "You're going to let him live with what he's done. Death would be too easy." Greg's business partners, the ones who'd known about Jessica, who'd covered for him at conferences and golf outings, suddenly found themselves under scrutiny too. I watched through the lobby windows as several of them were cornered by their wives, by other colleagues, faces red with embarrassment and anger. How many of them had facilitated his lies? How many had had drinks with Jessica while their own wives sat at home, oblivious? The exposure was spreading, the contamination reaching everyone who'd been complicit in Greg's deception. The social media storm started within hours. People had recorded the presentation on their phones, and by midnight, hashtags were trending. Philanthropist exposed. Gala reveal. Charity scandal. The videos spread across platforms, each view another nail in Greg's professional coffin. By morning, Greg's firm was doing damage control, releasing a carefully worded statement distancing themselves from his personal misconduct while reviewing his professional conduct with clients. The Philanthropist of the Year award was quietly rescinded. News outlets picked up the story. Charity gala turns into explosive divorce reveal. We were trending, our private catastrophe now public entertainment. Greg tried to call me 47 times that night. I counted each call, each desperate attempt to reach me, to explain, to spin his narrative. I blocked his number after the first desperate voicemail, his voice cracking as he begged me to understand, to give him a chance to explain. "Maggie, please, it's not what it looks like. I can explain everything. Jessica and I, it's complicated. I never meant to hurt you. Please, just call me back. We can fix this. We can work this out. Maggie, please. 25 years has to mean something. Please." Explain what? I'd seen everything I needed to see. The proof was irrefutable, documented, backed up in multiple locations. There was no explaining away photographic evidence, no rationalizing bank statements, no making excuses for systematic deception spanning nearly 2 years. Jessica, it turned out, had believed Greg was already divorced, that I was his ex-wife who refused to accept the end of the marriage. He'd painted himself as the victim of a bitter, unstable woman who wouldn't let him move on. Classic narcissist playbook, recasting the narrative so you're always the hero. When screenshots of his lies to her started circulating, other people at the gala had apparently known parts of the truth. She was devastated too. She released a statement through her lawyer, claiming she'd been deceived, that she'd never knowingly participated in an affair. Not that I had much sympathy to spare. She'd still participated in defrauding me, whether she knew the full truth or not. She was 14 years younger than Greg, worked at his firm, and had moved into an apartment paid for with money he'd stolen from his wife. She'd had enough red flags to open a theme park, but she'd chosen to ignore them because the life he was offering was too appealing to question. But watching Greg lose everything, his reputation, his relationship, his standing in the community, brought me a satisfaction I hadn't expected. It was cold and complete, a closing of accounts that left me feeling empty but clean. Within a week, he'd been asked to resign from his firm. Within 2 weeks, 3 of his major clients had transferred to other advisors. Within a month, he was essentially unemployable in Manhattan financial circles. His name had become synonymous with fraud and deception, a cautionary tale whispered at networking events and business lunches. The legal proceedings moved swiftly after that. With such public evidence and such clear financial malfeasance, Greg's lawyers advised him to settle quietly rather than fight. He had no leverage, no sympathetic narrative, no hope of winning in court. Linda negotiated brilliantly, playing hardball with Greg's overwhelmed attorneys. She secured me 70% of our marital assets, including our brownstone, most of our investment portfolio, and full reimbursement for the money he'd siphoned plus interest. Greg got his precious Soho apartment, which Jessica promptly moved out of, and whatever remained of his tarnished career. His firm quietly asked for his resignation, phrasing it as pursuing new opportunities in their press release. His business partners, the ones who'd enabled him, faced their own reckonings: divorces, lost clients, damaged reputations. Turns out, when you help someone else betray their spouse, people question your integrity in other areas too. Who wants a financial advisor who helps friends hide money from their wives? The emotional fallout was more complex. I'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, free. And I did feel those things, but I also felt grief. Not for Greg. He'd killed any love I'd had for him the moment he started gaslighting me. But for the life I'd thought I was living, for the future I'd imagined. 25 years don't just evaporate without leaving scars. Some nights, alone in the brownstone that was now fully mine, I'd find myself crying for the woman I'd been, the one who'd believed in the fairy tale. I was mourning the death of my own naivety, and that's a particular kind of painful. But slowly, gradually, I began to rebuild. The process was neither linear nor easy. There were days when getting out of bed felt like an insurmountable task. Days when the weight of everything threatened to crush me. But there were also days when I felt lighter than I had in years, unburdened by the lies and the constant vigilance. I threw myself into my graphic design work, taking on bigger clients, more ambitious projects. I'd stopped playing small to accommodate Greg's ego, stopped dimming my own light so his could shine brighter. The attic studio became my command center, walls covered with mood boards and sketches. I took on a rebranding project for a major nonprofit, something I never would have had the confidence to pursue while married to Greg. I won an industry award for the work, stood on a stage accepting recognition while thinking about how different this felt from watching Greg accept his fraudulent philanthropist award. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with over the years, people Greg had found boring or beneath us. Sarah, my college roommate who'd become a high school teacher, Greg had always dismissed her career as noble but unimpressive. Marcus and Joel, the couple we'd double dated with in our 20s, Greg had grown uncomfortable with their openness as he became more conservative. Rachel, my former colleague from my first design job, Greg had called her too intense and exhausting. Reconnecting with these people, I realized how much of myself I'd sacrificed to maintain Greg's version of our social circle. I started therapy, unpacking not just the betrayal but the patterns that had allowed it, my conflict avoidance, my need to be the perfect wife, my willingness to doubt my own perceptions to keep the peace. My therapist, Dr. Chen, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who saw through my attempts to minimize what I'd been through. "You experienced sustained psychological abuse," she said bluntly during our third session. "Financial abuse, emotional manipulation, gaslighting. Stop calling it a bad marriage and start acknowledging it for what it was." The work was brutal and necessary, like excavating a foundation and discovering it was built on sand. I had to examine my own complicity, not in Greg's choices, but in allowing my boundaries to erode over the years. I had to confront the ways I'd made myself smaller, quieter, more accommodating. I had to learn to trust my own judgment again, to recognize red flags, to believe in my own perceptions even when someone else denied them. The brownstone, once a shared space haunted by Greg's presence, became entirely mine. I repainted every room, choosing bold colors Greg would have vetoed. The master bedroom went from beige to deep emerald green. The living room transformed from neutral grays to warm terracotta. His den became a library, walls lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves I'd always wanted. His closet became more storage for my art supplies, the smell of his cologne gradually fading and being replaced by paper and ink. I hung new artwork, bold and colorful, the kind he'd always vetoed as too much. I bought furniture I loved, a velvet sofa in rich purple, a vintage credenza, quirky lamps from flea markets. I adopted a rescue cat, a fierce orange tabby named Ruthie, who seemed to understand that we were both rebuilding after trauma. She had trust issues, too, had been returned to the shelter twice for being too aggressive. But she and I understood each other. Some evenings, curled up with Ruthie and a book, I'd feel something unfamiliar. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but a quiet satisfaction in my own company, in the space I was creating for myself. Which brings me back to that moment, standing at the kitchen window, watching Greg burn our anniversary album. It happened 8 months after the gala, during what was supposed to be his final visit to collect the last of his things from the basement. The divorce was nearly finalized, just waiting on a judge's signature. We'd managed to avoid seeing each other for most of the process, communicating only through lawyers. But he'd texted asking to come by one last time for some boxes of old client files he'd stored in the basement. Instead, I found him in our backyard, his former backyard, feeding our memories to the fire. The album he'd spent thousands restoring, the one that had been such a centerpiece of our anniversary celebration 2 years ago. At first, I didn't understand. Why destroy it now, after everything? The evidence had already been exposed, the damage already done. What was the point? But as I watched the pages curl and blacken, orange flames consuming images of a marriage that had never been what it claimed to be, I realized he was trying to erase evidence, trying to rewrite history even now. If the photographic proof of our marriage disappeared, maybe he could tell people a different story. Maybe he could claim we'd been unhappy for years, that the divorce was mutual, that I'd exaggerated his betrayal. Maybe, in his twisted logic, burning the album would somehow undo the narrative I'd established. But he'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'm the graphic designer. I'd scanned every page of that album years ago for backup purposes, all those precious photos safely stored in the cloud and on multiple hard drives. His dramatic gesture was meaningless. Nothing more than smoke and ash and futile rage. I had the receipts, literally and figuratively. When he finally noticed me watching through the kitchen window, we locked eyes across the backyard. And I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sad smile, but a genuine smile of someone who'd survived his attempts to destroy her. I held up my phone, showing him the digital copies displayed on the screen, watching comprehension and then defeat wash over his face. He couldn't erase me. He couldn't rewrite our story to make himself the victim. The truth was documented, backed up, immortalized in multiple formats. His fire couldn't touch it. After he left that day, stalking through the house to grab his boxes without a word, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, I spent hours going through those digital photos, really looking at them for the first time since the gala. And you know what I noticed? The signs had always been there. The photos where his smile didn't reach his eyes, that forced grimace that passed for joy. The ones where he stood just slightly apart from me, body language closed off even as his arm draped around my shoulders. The increasingly frequent pictures where he was absent altogether, claiming he had to work, or had a headache, or wasn't feeling photogenic. Our entire marriage was there in pixels and light, and the truth had been visible all along if I'd been willing to see it. But we don't want to see such things, do we? We convince ourselves that every relationship has rough patches, that everyone gets distant sometimes, that suspicious behavior has innocent explanations. We gaslight ourselves before anyone else gets the chance, creating elaborate justifications for things that should be deal breakers. So let me share something I've learned, something I wish someone had told me years ago. Trust your instincts. I know that sounds simple, maybe even trite, but it's the most important thing I can tell you. When something feels wrong, when your gut is screaming that the numbers don't add up or the story doesn't make sense, believe that feeling. Don't let anyone, not your spouse, not your friends, not society, convince you that you're being paranoid or oversensitive or crazy. Women especially are taught to doubt ourselves, to prioritize harmony over honesty, to accept explanations that soothe rather than demand evidence. We're socialized to be accommodating, to avoid conflict, to trust others more than we trust ourselves. That conditioning almost destroyed me. I ignored countless red flags because I'd been taught that good wives don't question, don't snoop, don't make accusations without proof. But by the time you have absolute proof, the damage is often catastrophic. The warning signs of what I experienced are actually well-documented psychological patterns. Financial infidelity, where one partner secretly controls, spends, or hides money, is a form of economic abuse that appears in approximately 40% of relationships, according to the National Endowment for Financial Education. It's often a precursor to other forms of betrayal because it requires the same skills: deception, compartmentalization, gaslighting. When someone is willing to lie to you about money, they're usually lying about other things too. Money is power, and controlling it is about controlling the relationship. The specific tactics Greg used, minimizing my concerns, accusing me of paranoia, redirecting blame onto my mental state, are classic manipulation strategies designed to make the victim doubt their own perceptions and memories. It's a form of psychological abuse so common that it has a name: DARVO, which stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. The perpetrator denies the behavior, attacks the person confronting them, and reverses the roles to make themselves appear to be the victim. Another crucial pattern is the creation of a separate life, what therapists call compartmentalization. When someone maintains distinct personas with different people, the devoted husband at home, the single man at the apartment, they demonstrate a concerning level of deception capacity. This isn't occasional white lies or social politeness. This is sustained, systematic fraud that requires constant mental energy to maintain. People capable of this level of compartmentalization often have narcissistic traits, viewing relationships as transactions where they're entitled to take what they want while maintaining their public image. The image matters more than reality, appearances more than authenticity. They construct elaborate facades and become enraged when those facades are threatened, not because they regret their behavior, but because they hate being exposed. If you're reading this and recognizing patterns in your own relationship, please understand that you're not alone and you're not crazy. The doubt you're feeling is by design. Manipulation thrives in uncertainty. So let me give you practical advice, the kind I wish I'd had earlier. Document everything. Take photos, make copies, screenshot messages, keep a detailed journal with dates and times. Don't rely on memory. Write it down. Open a private bank account that your partner doesn't know about, and start setting aside emergency money, even if it's just $20 a week. This isn't being sneaky, it's being prepared. Consult with a divorce attorney just to understand your rights, even if you're not ready to file. Knowledge is power, and knowing your options reduces fear. Tell someone you trust what you're experiencing. Isolation is one of a manipulator's most powerful tools. They want you alone, doubting yourself, with no outside perspectives to validate your reality. And please get into therapy with someone who specializes in emotional abuse, because you'll need support to navigate both the relationship and your own healing afterward. This isn't something you can just get over or move past. The trauma of sustained manipulation changes your brain chemistry, affects your ability to trust, and requires professional help to process. The path forward isn't easy. Even now, almost a year and a half after the gala, I have moments where the grief catches me off guard. I'll see a couple celebrating an anniversary and feel that sharp pang of loss. Not for Greg specifically, but for the innocence of believing my marriage was real. I'll come across an old photo and feel the dissonance between the memory I thought I had and the reality I now understand. I'll meet someone new and feel my defenses rise, my trust issues creating walls before anyone gets close enough to hurt me. But those moments are becoming rarer. They're being replaced by new experiences, new joys, new versions of myself that I'm discovering in the aftermath. I started painting again. Something I'd abandoned in my 20s when Greg had suggested it wasn't practical, that I should focus on commercial design if I wanted to make money. I'd internalized his dismissal, had let my creative passion die to be more palatable, more successful by his narrow definition. Now I paint for hours in my studio, creating abstract pieces that make no commercial sense but feed my soul. I've sold a few pieces at local galleries, but that's not the point. The point is reclaiming parts of myself I'd amputated to fit into Greg's vision of who I should be. I travel when I want, where I want, without having to consider someone else's preferences. Last spring, I spent 3 weeks in Italy, something I'd always wanted to do but Greg had dismissed as impractical and touristy. I wandered through Florence and Rome and the Amalfi Coast, eating incredible food, absorbing art and history, feeling pieces of myself coming back to life. I met other solo travelers, had adventures, experienced freedom in a way I hadn't since before marriage. I make decisions for myself, answer only to myself, and the freedom is intoxicating. Simple things, choosing what to have for dinner, how to spend my Saturday, whether to stay up late reading or wake up early to paint, take on profound significance when you've spent decades negotiating every choice with someone else's preferences. The thing about being betrayed on this scale is that it forces you to rebuild your entire identity. I'm not the woman I was before Greg's lies were exposed. That Maggie died in the fire of revelation, along with her naive trust and her willingness to make herself small. The new Maggie, the current Maggie, is harder, wiser, more skeptical. But she's also more fully herself, more authentic, more alive. She trusts her instincts. She sets boundaries. She refuses to shrink to make others comfortable. I don't know if I'll ever trust someone enough to remarry. The idea of being that vulnerable again terrifies me. Opening up to someone, sharing finances, building a life together. All the things I once did without question now feel impossibly risky. But I'm okay with that uncertainty. I'm learning to be complete on my own, to find my worth in myself rather than in someone else's perception of me. My children have been incredible through all of this. Melissa and David both struggled initially with reconciling the father they'd known with the man I'd exposed. There were difficult conversations, tears, accusations that I'd destroyed their family. David didn't speak to me for 2 months after the gala, convinced I'd gone too far, that private matters should have stayed private. Melissa wavered between supporting me and mourning the father she thought she knew. But as more details emerged, as they saw the extent of his deception, not just the affair, but the financial theft, the systematic lying, the way he'd manipulated me and gaslit my concerns, their support solidified. David eventually called, voice thick with emotion, to apologize for doubting me. Melissa came to stay with me for a week, helping me repaint and rearrange, physically transforming the space as we talked through what had happened. They've helped me understand that Greg's choices were about his own character flaws, not about anything lacking in me or our family. That's been crucial for my healing, rejecting the narrative that I somehow caused or deserved his betrayal. People make choices. Greg chose lies over honesty, fantasy over reality, ego over integrity. Those were his decisions, and I refuse to carry responsibility for them. Both kids have also grappled with their relationship with their father. David maintains minimal contact, mostly for legal and financial matters related to their inheritance. Melissa has tried harder to preserve some connection, but even she admits it's not the same. How do you trust someone who deceived so thoroughly? How do you maintain a relationship with someone whose entire life was a performance? As I sit here now, in my sunlit studio with Ruthie purring beside me and my latest design project spread across the desk, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Hope. Not naive hope that everything will be perfect, but grounded hope that I'm building a life that's truly mine. The brownstone has become my sanctuary, every room reflecting my choices, my aesthetic, my dreams. I look around and see myself in every carefully chosen color, every piece of art, every book on the shelves. I'm working on a children's book illustration project that might become my first published work, a story about a cat who finds her way home after getting lost. The metaphor isn't lost on me. I'm planning that trip extension to Greece in the fall, something I'd always wanted to do but Greg had dismissed as unnecessary since we'd already been to Italy. I'm living my life out loud, boldly, unapologetically, refusing to dim my light for anyone's comfort. So here's what I want you to take from my story. Betrayal will either destroy you or forge you into something stronger. The choice is yours. The pain is real and valid, but it doesn't have to be permanent. You can survive someone trying to erase you. You can rebuild after discovering your foundation was lies. You can reclaim your narrative and write your own ending. It won't be easy, and there will be days when staying in bed feels like the only option. There will be moments when the grief overwhelms you, when you question every memory, when you wonder if you'll ever feel whole again. But on the other side of the devastation is a life you choose, a life that's authentically yours, a life where you never have to doubt your own perceptions because you've learned to trust yourself first. The truth may hurt, but it will always set you free. And freedom? Real freedom. The freedom to be fully yourself, to trust your instincts, to build a life that reflects your authentic values, is worth every ounce of pain it takes to achieve it. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Have you ever experienced something similar? That moment when everything you believed turned out to be a carefully constructed lie? What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted him privately or gone for the public exposure? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help other people feel less alone. If this resonated with you, if you found yourself thinking about someone who needs to hear this story, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe because I'll be sharing more stories of survival, revenge, and redemption every week. Until the next story, take care of your heart. It's the only one you've got, and you deserve to give it to someone who'll handle it with the care you'd give yourself.